Okay, I'm really pleased to see everyone here. This is Basic Income Around the World with a really stellar lineup of guests. We've got Sarath Davala, who is a member of the BN Executive Committee and is organizing the Basic Income Network in India, and it's also crucially involved with the pilots. What was that, about 10 years ago, Sarath, or so? Yeah, anyway, so he's got vast experience and a lot of things to say. There's Gabriela Cabaña Alvear, is that right? Yeah. And she's organizing in Chile and also organizing a Basic Income Network throughout Latin America, which I think will be very interesting to hear about. Julio Linares, who is hopefully joining us from home pretty soon. He's been living in Berlin for the last few years, but he's originally from Guatemala. He's also on the BN Executive Committee, but also has been working very hard in Berlin, organizing basic income activities there, and also with Circles UBI, which hopefully we can find out a bit more about later. And then there's, last but certainly not least, is Stacey Rutland, who's been organizing the income movement in the US. I don't know much about your background, Stacey, so if you need to fill anything in, then please do. But yeah, so we've got a fantastic lineup here. I just wanted to say, some of us knew him, some of us didn't know him, but he was certainly a friend to humanity. Just to mark that David Graeber died last week. A lot of us are still trying to find our feet after that, and you know, maybe some people who knew him or whose life he affected, you might want to say something a little bit, you know, at the beginning. So yeah, I've just got a few questions, and which people will be hopefully answering. We're trying to make this a bit more of a conversational thing. Okay, first of all, I'd really like to get a picture from you of sort of how much do you think basic income is known about, how much do you think is supported, and that kind of basic question in your area, which is something we really don't know much about. Stacey, do you want to go
Sure.
on that?
Sure.
Great.
So it's lovely to be here. Thank you so much, Barb, for the invitation, and it's great to see all these faces, some familiar and some new, and happy to be part of this conversation with a great panel. So in the United States, I think we've certainly seen an uptick in polling when people are polled about basic income and UBI, just understanding and recognition of what that is, and approval for it has certainly gone up. So we found in the last year, really as kind of a confluence of Andrew Yang's campaign and then what's happened with the coronavirus, and in the United States, the legislation that's been proposed by many people in Congress, that's essentially an emergency UBI. It's created a lot of conversations in our political discourse and cultural discourse around this idea of basic income. So understanding what it is has risen. It used to be that if you ever were going to write about an article about UBI, you had to spell out universal basic income and have an explanation of what it was, and then you could put in parentheses UBI for the rest of the article. But really, that's become less and less necessary. When people say UBI, they know what it is. Support for it is another thing, and I think that also just depends on how the questions are asked. We've seen upticks in polling of support for it. We're over the 50% mark in many polls, so we've kind of broken that into the majority, which is great to see. Most polls are about voters, active voters, to understand, because it's considered a political issue. But if it's asked not as universal basic income, but asked as, do you believe that the government should be providing ongoing payments, ongoing cash payments to people as part of a building of a consistent income and building an income floor? During COVID, we see 75% and upwards of our population of voters supporting that. So So when it comes to an emergency UBI for moments like we find ourselves in right now during this pandemic, support skyrockets. So that's been very, very kind of good to see. Of course, the circumstances in which it's kind of forcing people to start to contemplate that we're in this here in the United States, for sure, kind of an economic free fall is really a shame. But to see that it has forced people to start thinking about the problems with our economy and ways we might want to fix it, and looking to basic income and this idea of a guaranteed income as a potential solution has been heartening. Great, thank you. That's brilliant. Sarath, do you want to go next about this?
Thank you so much, Barb. It's really a pleasure, and it's really an honor to be in this group to share our experiences. Well, I think it has drawn a lot of attention. We finished our study in 2014, and so with a sense of accomplishment that we have this study. Now people are going to be raving about this study and fantastic. But nothing happened. 1 year, 2 years, and we were going and making presentations here and there. But as it would happen, the 2016 Swiss referendum, and then our study got some attention and importance, and people started asking, "Oh, you have done a study? Yeah, I remember 4 years ago you made a presentation." Things like that, And very interestingly, 2017, government itself came with a kind of a proposal and submitted it in the parliament. We participated along with the government and provided all the data and evidence that it works and all that. Anyway, after that, I think it really took off. 2019 elections, it became an issue. The main opposition party, the Congress party, actually in the last minute, they came out with their proposal. And another political party, local Sikkim political party, they actually wanted to implement a full basic income. So it was catching up. But let me say that people started talking about universal basic income, half of them for the right reasons and half of them for the wrong reasons. And I'm not with those who are talking about it with the wrong reasons. People who are talked about it, see, they were talking about it also from the government point of view, that it's efficient and blah, blah, blah. You can cut down the administrative costs. But the government, nobody was talking about social justice and equity, all that. That was not part of their language. But subsequent to the elections, there was more interest. Even ordinary people started talking about it. In fact, ordinary students, university teachers, bank employees, and retired army fellows, you can't believe, they send messages and saying that this is an interesting idea. So they come from social justice point of view. That is what is really, really encouraging, that ordinary people are coming to this idea saying that this seems to be a good idea. But maybe usual objections, and we all know those objections. In fact, the other day, somebody was telling me that you can create a bot which will answer all the regular objections, and you just have to press the button, and then that you will get the full answer for that. It's an artificial intelligence device. We know every place you go, every new person asks the same questions. So it is known. But I would say many politicians are talking about it because it seems to have the magic of getting the votes on the one hand and also pleasing people. So they are trying to target it to one section. For example, in my state, the farmers are given an unconditional amount of money every year per acre. You get it unconditionally, whether they cultivate it or not. So, and then when they implemented this policy, that party came with the landslide victory. And that has prompted all other parties to start talking about it. Yeah, there is something about it. So the two things have happened. They didn't call it a basic income. But what is critical about that is we seem to be seeing the problems of conditionalities and how it doesn't deliver, and slowly moving towards unconditionality, which seems to be politicians are seeing that political dividends and all this seems to be two birds with one shot, or one bird with two shots, whatever that. And so which is a very good thing that is happening, that unconditional is slowly getting recognition from the important players. But ordinary people, also see the value in it. But there are some who say that you can't give anything free, all that we know. So that's how it is getting known. It's getting known quite well.
Okay, Carolyn, do you want to speak to that? To what's going on in Kenya? How much support do you think basic income has, or how much is it known? All of that.
Yep. So speaking for the context of Kenya and pretty much what we see in the neighboring countries where we are doing cash transfers, first thing is still people don't recognize the model as basic income as it were. They wouldn't call it basic income. But we are seeing a higher tolerance of, cash transfers compared to when we started the universal basic income experiment, and generally cash transfers as it were. When we started working in this landscape, we were working within a population where either people thought that giving people free money would make them lazy because, people needed to earn money that they'd worked for, or that if you were giving people free money, you basically are getting money from suspicious sources, including being an Illuminati. And we are getting to, a time in the life of development aid when people, number one, are starting to appreciate the role of cash in changing situations that people live in, and appreciating particularly the stream payments as we commonly refer to the basic income transfers, monthly payments. People are appreciating them even more. So speaking from a community perspective, it is not strange for you to hear people who've not received the transfers asking when they'd be included, or people who are already receiving the transfers were asking that, we know it's going to end at some point, but could you consider, like expanding and, extending the dates when we are going to be receiving this money. So, so that means that, there's already a great level of demystifying the myths that were around cash and their appreciation of what cash can do in communities. At a policy level, what does this mean? Again, just like we see in the community, government, both at the local level and at national level, had been very intolerant to cash transfer programs. But with the introduction of, the social protection programs, governments are, more responsive to cash. Basic income for the government is still not like the sole policy that they would go for. And just today, our permanent secretary for labor was speaking at a webinar just an hour ago, talking about, should we provide children with universal grants, and what does that mean? And that gave me an opportunity to just get where the government sits in terms of how do we perceive cash. And the policy position is that government would really love to do cash and do it universally.
Okay.
They still don't call it universal basic income. They call it universal targeting, which is a good thing, that people can start talking about, cash, universal provision of cash rather than targeted cash in a more open way. However, I think that government is still very wary to speak about universality because of the financial implications, for knowing that if they speak about this as a policy consideration, then there'll be pressure from the citizenry to finance the same. So the language that government is using is that cash is good, and where necessary, cash should be provided. provided, but policy should consider the provision of universal health, universal education, basically, marrying universal services with universal cash transfers. But there is really a very huge tolerance for cash transfers. In the development sector, we were acting in a space where cash transfers was mainly a preserve of people working in the humanitarian space in the northeastern part of the country, where you have refugees and disasters. But now we are seeing that more and more organizations are embracing cash and are seeing the need for people to, to be supported, to cushion them. And, we are seeing organizations who are now pretty much looking at providing universal cash transfers to communities that they're implementing other programs in. For me, as an advocate of basic income, this is a step in the right direction. It may not be everyone yet, but seeing that organizations are starting small bits, one person at a time, one community at a time, is a pointer to, moving the needle the right direction and pushing people to the right decisions, where we tell them, use money where you're going to create the greatest impact and cause the least harm. In terms of research and evidence, last week, Give Directly just released the first results of our universal basic income, and the PIs released this in the context of COVID-19. And what are the things that they're finding? That, there's evidence that providing a basic income cushions people from food insecurity. And even when people suffer losses in businesses, there is sustained, those businesses are sustained because they have an alternative source of income. They don't eat up their capital. Businesses may not be growing, but they also do not flop completely. And that's something that, I see as a step in the right direction, that the pandemic may have been bad, but it's also giving us a platform for which we can start policy conversations with the government to say, we have the evidence, we have seen through COVID, and we have also seen through implementation of activities with the communities. That's it from me, Bob.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Thank you, Carolyn. Julio, are you ready to talk now? Or you look like you're settled.
Yeah. Yes, I'm home now.
Yes, for you, there's kind of two things. There's kind of basic income, and then there's also, because you're working in the cryptocurrency space.
I would just first take a moment to give a little respect to our Gabi and myself's professor, mentor, David Graeber. He was a big influence in our work. He died, sadly, about a week ago now. It's been quite a shocking moment. He was a big intellectual, not just for us as his students, but just for the world in general. He was always pushing the boundaries of the imagination of what is possible, and I think that's what I think we should carry with us of his legacy. If you haven't read his work, please do so. He has many books on the imagination, on violence, on debt, on bureaucracy, which really give us tool sets to think about how can we make things differently in very practical ways. And so, so I work here in Germany, and my work has been largely influenced by David's influence, in the sense that when I started working on basic income, I was always thinking about, from a policy perspective, how do we finance it? Do we make a sovereign wealth fund? Do we do tax redistribution? Do we do money printing? And I was doing that in Taiwan, where I was living at that time, in this island at the end of the Pacific Ocean, where we made a basic income network. And through these explorations, I came to eventually to study with David and thinking about, what is actually money and where does it come from and who has the power to issue it. And so I ended up here in Berlin working on a project called Circles UBI, which basically it's a computer protocol that allows people to issue their own money system from the bottom up. And so what we're doing more than the technology, we're politicizing this technology to say people have the right, they should have, they have to have the right to claim monetary creation as a basic income. So what we're doing here in Berlin, in Germany, is that we're trying to work with communities that already exist, that already exchange with each other, and say, would you like to use a money system that empowers you to give each other a basic income, to finance each other like this? And so that's what I work on here in Berlin. Now, in terms of Germany, the knowledge of basic income is actually quite far spread. I think that has been more thanks to this project called Mein Grundeinkommen, who has been giving people a basic income as a lottery. So basically, people donate to a lottery that every time they reach 12,000 euros, they give at random one person in the pot a basic income, and then they follow them. They document what happens after a year. And this has really reached the mind of the imagination in Germany. Like people, when you talk about Grundeinkommen, which means ground income, they know what it is, right? So yeah, I mean, in Germany, the conversation is quite far spread, but you know, we are living here in the birthplace of the modern nation state. This is the, you know, the epitome of bureaucratic systems, if you want to put it in those terms. And so the sort of political apparatus is quite slow when actually taking this proposal seriously. Like the SPD's head famously said that basic income is neoliberalism, you know, the Social Democratic Party. So, which, you know, this is the sort of, you know, statements where we're at when you talk about the center here in Germany, right? The Greens talk about it, the left talks about it, but there isn't really nobody getting behind it as a political movement, which is a big problem. This is something Icelandic talks about a lot, that the left does not see the importance that a basic income can give to a progressive movement. And so what we're trying to do here in Germany, from, let's say, I mean, what I'm doing here with the people I work with is exploring the relationship between anarchism and basic income, to say, like, how about communities, people autonomously decide to give each other a basic income without the state, to sort of challenge the imagination of what is possible. Because, yeah, like, think about it here in Germany, it's of course not as bad as in India, but I think every day or every 2 days, one farmer commits suicide because they do not have the means to reproduce their livelihood. They are fully in debt, and you have all this the same suspects as always: not debt, great stress. You know, they have a lot of financial stress in general. And so, like, thinking about a progressive movement here in Europe as a migrant, I think is quite important, because there are no, I don't see at least, real emerging alternatives. So we have to make them. We have to prove that it is possible to change the systems from within. This is actually one of David's last projects, was to think about how can we democratize the monetary institutions that exist today. We do not need a central bank. We do not need private banks issuing debt to people. We can create democratic institutions that give people a basic income and that are maintained by people.
Great.
And so, yeah.
That's, yeah, great, Julio. Gabriela?
Thank you. Well, thank you all for being here. Thank you, Barb, and thank you, Julio, also for mentioning our dear friend and mentor in so many ways. I think it's really nice that we're talking about basic income today. It's a really great way of honoring him, because I think, for me, the most interesting thing that basic income allows is the sort of conversations we can have, and the expansion of our imagination, of our political imagination, but also our affective imagination, our social imagination, just the idea that we could live a different life. And I think that's precisely what has been happening, at least here in Chile and in Latin America, in the last, I would say, 6 months. So I'm going to try to sum up what sort of conversations we have been having. I have to say, before I heard about basic income a couple of years ago, and I joined the movement actively, this was a topic that was rarely mentioned. I mean, I had never heard about it, and it wasn't present in any group, at least here in Chile. And now we have seen an explosion in the last months. We get more and more people interested. We started our own node of basic income here in Chile. In many other countries in Latin America, it is also happening. We're meeting, we're talking about it. And for many people, it's finally a moment in which it's possible to have conversations that we didn't get to have for so long. And conversations that never seemed to be important now are finally important. For instance, we are finally talking about the problems of targeting, that why we use targeting so much, and in Latin America we abuse of targeting for so many of our policies, and we have become experts in deciding who is the poor that deserves the money and who is the poor that doesn't deserve the money, and these moralizing notions of what people do with their money, and how they should take care of each other, we're finally seeing how terrible those tools are. And especially because since COVID, all of our governments, it's interesting because we meet once a month with different people, with people from different countries in Latin America. And every time they give an update on how, the first package of measures taken by governments were not enough because so many people were left out. So now they're doing a second version, and then they do a third version, and they're always adding and trying to correct the bureaucracy. But obviously we know this is not enough. It's always insufficient, and this has really been building resentment and fear and hunger, and in a very real way a lot of pain among people. So this has also been a great moment to come together, and there has been a lot of, I have been at least in many political debates on how and why we should move to a basic income as a new human right. And now we feel it really in our bodies that it makes sense. So it gives me a lot of hope. It's still far from being a popular demand. My dream is that when I go back to Santiago, to the capital, to the protest that probably will come back in the context of our constitutional referendum, I would love to go with a basic income banner and see others carrying that banner. We're not there yet, but I think we're getting there. And I really hope that the constitutional process that we're starting, in case that you didn't know, we are about to start the writing of our new constitution, hopefully now in October. I really hope that will also be a moment for a more interesting and emancipatory and political imagination through basic income. So that's basically where our conversations are right now.
Oh, great to hear, Gabriela, for sure. I mean, the other thing is, it also seems like certainly in the UK government, they're doing anything but basic income. Okay, so we've had sort of people's salaries have been supported, but there's still, and the welfare has been raised, but actually there's still about 3 million people who've been left out of that, and there's a campaign around that. So I'd also like to just do a round about what you see are the real, the kind of political barriers you have to get around. I mean, some people have mentioned those already a little bit. And also how you see us actually managing to get around those barriers. Maybe just a little bit on this, because there are a couple other things I want to ask at the very end. Sarath, do you want to go with that one?
Yeah. Barb, I think more than political also are there, but I see that primarily the objection comes from, is cultural in nature, that we have inherited a certain kind of an industrial imagination, and in that imagination, in the industrial ethic and industrial work ethic and all that to suit one particular class, and that has been so internalized that you start laughing when you want to give. You never ask a beggar to come into your house and give him fresh food. You always give dirty food, rotten food to him, or yesterday's food to him. So there is a whole problem about what we have inherited, the values we have inherited, how we look at people, and how we look at as if work and wage have a very good relationship, which is not. It's a very problematic relationship they have. I think majority of people in the world are underpaid, and nobody talks about it. So there is a whole question of the power relationship, and and the whole point about why private inheritance has become such a natural thing, as if it is an apple falling from the tree, and public inheritance is completely forgotten. So I don't know how and when, and we have to reclaim that. We have to reclaim that enlightenment, that real enlightenment, and recreate and create a new imagination of how we relate to other people. I'm not saying it will take another 100 years. No, it's going to happen in the next 10 years, actually. That's what I see. I have a lot of hope that those perceptions And those things are going to break because of the crisis, all kinds of crises that humanity is going to go through. So that is the one. And then you have the left posturing, the right posturing, and all this social democrats continuing to say that jobs, 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 jobs. What Guy Mox says, jobs, jobs, jobs. So as if jobs are there and they're just to go and grab, as if full employment is still possible when 90% of the people are in the informal sector. So it's a facade. It's going to go. We are going to make it go.
I was just going to add on to what Sarath is saying there. I think that in the United States, this idea of the cultural side of things and the barriers that people that we all, I think, experience is deep. You know, I think the whole idea of the American dream is built on the idea of upward mobility. It's built on the idea that if you work hard, you'll get rewarded and things will be better for your kids than they were for you. And you know, the moment you start to talk about this idea that the economy actually is broken, it doesn't work that way anymore, and that there's another way that we might want to approach that. It's a hard thing. You're breaking down somebody's belief, like, and the beliefs that they've been driving towards for their entire working life, you know, and I think that that's a really hard thing for people to start to accept, like, okay, all this work that I've been doing is not paying off. Now we know that there is a shift happening because more and more people are experiencing the reality of the way that our economy is not working for people. So we have, and the statistics of you know, the idea that in the United States, life expectancy is declining for the first time, you know, that for the first time, the generation that has been born is not going to be doing better than their parents, you know, and the kids that are coming through public school education right now are looking at their options with college, and they're realizing like that maybe is not the path. And as soon as those things, you know, start to become understood and recognized as just the truth, the reality of where we're finding ourselves, I think that is laying the groundwork for then the question, well then if not this, what? And but until people start to really and things like the pandemic, I think it's why for us in the US and it feels like across the globe, why the pandemic has created such an opportunity for conversations around this, because it's hit so many people. The problems with our economy has hit so many people all at the same time. People who maybe haven't had to pay attention to the way that our economy works, people who have been, you know, right steadily in the middle class and hasn't had to really think about what's happening to this growing kind of divide in our economies. A lot of them are finding themselves suddenly at the sharp end of our economy and having to face some really, really tough moments for themselves and their family. So we see, and those are people who often are the most actively involved in politics, are, you know, most engaged in conversations, are most likely to vote. All of those kind of people are suddenly realizing like, hey, I may not be, and my children may not be having the kind of existence that I thought, and it's all kind of getting pulled out from under them. And now we're having real conversations. So I think that there is, I agree with Sarath. We have at Income Movement, we built out our roadmap for getting a federal universal basic income passed, and it's a 10-year plan. And that gets us through 5 election cycles. We have 2-year election cycles for our House of Representatives, which is, you know, a lot of people that we need to get turned to UBI. But we agree that certainly in some ways the pandemic in our mind may have compressed that timeline, because so many people are getting over this hurdle, this most important and significant cultural hurdle of understanding that this myth and this dream that we've all been kind of fed actually doesn't pan out, and that very intentionally our system has been set up to not actually support that for many decades. Mm-hmm. And so with that, we are starting to see this a larger embrace of the public. And as soon as the public supports the ideas and start to talk about the ideas, we do have enough of a progressive faction of our society, of our political structure, that, what we've seen with Bernie Sanders in 2016, they talked about a $15 minimum wage and a jobs guarantee program, but more and more of the younger generation of politicians that are moving through the Progressive Party are talking about basic income as an important part, whether, and that is actually really interesting to be moving more away from this idea of work and supporting workers and more into the cash transfer space. And we think that that's only going to grow as more and more people in our society start to recognize that the economy isn't working and starts to question this idea of income. And then when we replace a lot of really old white men in our system who have benefited from our economy and built an economy for them. And so we think in 10 years, we're seeing the beginning of a process of a shift culturally, a shift in our political landscape and who our representatives are, and then a shift in kind of just how obvious the problems with our economy are and the way that they're presenting themselves in our society to be able to force the question of, if not this, what?
Great, thanks, Stacey. I mean, I think the thing is with that whole, what everybody's mentioned, the so-called work ethic. Yeah, it always just seems to apply to poor people. I mean, we sort of tolerate a huge class of, well, maybe not so huge class, and as David pointed out, it was the 1% versus the 99%, who have most of the resources. And certainly, in this country and also the U.S., I mean, we've just seen this massive transfer of wealth upward, rather than using it as an occasion to spread it around. Who else wants to come in on this? Carolyn or?
Yes, Barb, I'd like to come in. And so speaking from a context, I think there's a plane that is flying over me. Sorry about the noise. But I was just going to speak about the context and can't belabor the point about cultural orientation and its impact on the creation of visibility for UBI, and really resonates with me what Sarath has said about just people just being brought up within the confines of some capitalistic box that makes them believe that money has to come from a certain source and money has to be provided by a certain people, and very low tolerance for alternatives. And that is what a capitalist would want to do, and would want us to believe that, you got to work really hard and make lots of profit for you to live comfortably. And we see that even in the rural areas, like really, really vulnerable people have been made to believe that. But I think that the next other thing for us has been the distance between the source of the money and the people, that there has been that distance, that gap for how can we reach those people who actually need these resources. And for me, I think that the thing that has destabilized the status quo for us, particularly in East Africa, is the evolution of mobile technology and mobile money. And, the fact that institutions, organizations such as Give Directly are using that platform to destabilize traditional thinking of institutions that provided, food aid and food rations that are very expensive with elaborate procurement processes, which take up lots of money that can be used to give people money into their pockets, has been a game changer. And, it is one technology that is also opening the eyes of big donors, people who had been brought up in the development space to believe that, there was no way of reaching poor people. There was no way of giving them resources. And now technology has got money into the hands of poor people, and poor people in return have not disappointed. They have used that money in ways that has shown that they feel more empowered, and they're able to speak and say. Yesterday I was just at a meeting with the UK High Commissioner here in Kenya, and they were making an announcement about a grant they were giving to Give Directly, and blatantly one of the community members told them, don't bring us food, give us money, send us money into our phones, because that's what creates change. That's what empowers us to make decisions about our lives. So technology for me is a big, big space. The next other thing is political buy-in. I think that we haven't yet had political buy-in for this concept for two reasons in our context. Number one, that the popularity of cash is just starting to take off. So we've had cash being that underdog amidst all the other interventions that have been taking place. And then when politicians are speaking, or the decision makers or policy makers, they don't see cash at the forefront. And I think that's a challenge for us as advocates, that we should find spaces where we can speak more and louder to decision makers, policy makers, about how impactful cash can be, whether that means we bring in evidence, we bring in the people who've been impacted by cash, or we bring in our experiences to bring knowledge to politicians, to decision makers and policy makers. That is the thing that I think is still lacking. We need a critical mass of action-oriented advocacy, pushing for this agenda and creating visibility for cash, because we will not win for basic income until people understand that cash works. I think those were the 4 points that I had, Barb. Back to you.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you so much, Carolyn. Gabriela, I understand you had.
Yes.
You want to just
I just wanted to add briefly, like, two sort of ethnographic vignettes that I think can show what the main political obstacles are we're facing here in Chile and in Latin America, and more broadly, I would say. So when we first started writing about basic income in March, when it was clear that the pandemic was going to hit hard, we wrote first with another friend from the network, a general article explaining basic income. And then we asked to write something again, and what the editor of this magazine that is very well read, and is focused on bringing academic debates to the public, what he asked from us was that we needed to write something that would prove and convince people that a basic income wouldn't make people lazy. So they wanted something that would show evidence that this was not going to make people stop working, and that we had that proved in our writing. And I was upset because, like, you can actually write that sort of thing, and you can show the evidence, and you can say, look, there is no evidence this happens. But I actually made the point, and I wanted to make it larger, and I didn't, about saying, look, what is the problem with this? Like, we need to talk about this. Why do we assume that keeping our current levels of work, it's even desirable in the first place? Like, we actually should be talking about how we manage to work less from many perspectives, like one being the ecological, mental health. I mean, we can think about so many reasons why our current situation, or how it was before COVID, it was just completely insane. And this was coming from someone who was sympathetic to the idea, but it's always coming from this technocratic, you need to first talk about basic income and then say right away, oh, but don't worry, people will continue working. They really want to work very hard. And I'm really uncomfortable with that. And then the second one is that last night we were having a panel in the Latin American network about the social ecological dimensions of basic income. So we were talking about what would happen with consumption and the carbon footprint of consumption if you increase the income of everyone. And one of our friends was making the point of, is the highest 10% that has like the larger by far material and carbon footprint. So if you increase at those lower levels, the income of the lower levels, but you decrease and you cut the income of the ones above, actually you don't have to necessarily increase your material and carbon footprint. And someone was asking, like, oh, but how can we educate the people that will start receiving more money so they're going to consume sustainably? And I was like, no one asked that question to rich people. No one asked, how can we educate rich people so they can start consuming more sustainably? Like, and they are the ones promoting and driving all this environmental disaster that we have. And it's just that we are so fixed in this idea of managing the others and controlling them and patronizing them. It's crazy. And this is from people that we would put at the left of the political spectrum. So those are things that I think are very symptomatic of where we are. And just one point about work ethic, because in this, I think David was right, that is really that what is keeping capitalism together. I remember having this conversation in the last basic income conference in India last year. And I talked with people from all over the world, and we always ended up talking. They would always tell me like, yes, you know, I know work ethic is like a big deal in capitalism, but in my country is really, you know, here is really the most important thing. And people from the United States would tell me, from Japan, from Korea, and like everywhere, you know, like we all feel that in our country, you know, this is completely impossible to move. This is a rocket that we cannot move. So it's interesting how we all have like put this inside ourselves so much. Just wanted to share those things.
Julio, did you have anything to say?
Yeah, here it's interesting what happens in Germany, right? Because you have, you know, a lot of my anarchist friends receive the state. They're quite comfortable, you know. So even the revolutionaries do not have the space to say, oh, they're not precarious enough to, so to speak. Let's say, you know, so the state is really everywhere, and also then the work ethic is everywhere. And so everybody, like, you know, feels alienated because they have to go to the Arbeitsamt, the work bureau, to like tell them that they're trying to pretend to work and that they're applying for things and they're just filling out paperwork, you know, just to pretend that they're working. And so they're, you know, doing work that is not paid to try to get a work that's paid. So it internalizes in people. So the money that they get, this conditional cash transfer they get, comes with this sort of colonization of we need this in return. Like we need to make you feel guilty. We need to make you feel shame that you're not working. And it's really at the core of a lot of German people, especially even in the left, you know. So that's a bit of a problem. So how to release people from this guilt? In German, the word for debt, for like money debt, is also the word for guilt. So it's deep in the German psyche, this notion. So, you know, changing that requires a lot of rituals and a lot of ways in which to do actions. I think the main problem in Germany and in Europe is that people think that they can solve all the problems just by thinking about them, you know, and that's wrong. You know, people have to act. We need to change things by acting, by actions, doing things differently. And so I think in that sense, I would say that we need to seize the means of the production of meaning. Like people in Europe are always like, oh, what's the meaning of my life? Should I go to Tanzania next year, or maybe Thailand or Bolivia or whatever? And at the same time, people are so alienated from death that their own countries make by selling weapons to Syria, by not letting refugees in Greece. And so there is this sort of numbing element to existing here in Europe that is quite alienating. And so breaking free of that means people have to really sort of say, okay.
Oh no. Julio, one thing, just before you, like with the circles, I mean, what do you think is like the biggest barrier to people kind of accepting a basic income on the, you know, like practical level? You know,
I think it's really the legal aspects, like the state really, like, because people here believe that everything will be done by institutions. And so to have this sort of more communal, community-based thing, it's really always at the expectation that the government will somehow be there. So it's really an interesting challenge because like we go to like, you know, farmers and communities that are already there, and we tell them, and they're like, okay, this is great, this works. But at some point, the fear of the government coming in comes in. And so it's also breaking this challenge of saying, actually, you can do this without the government. People have done money systems without governments for thousands of years. It's not a new thing. It's just in this day and age, especially like considering the crisis. Look at the US. Like towns again in the US are making their own local money systems, like they did in the 1930s. So this memory is there. And so it's just a matter of seizing that moment of the imagination, not that the financial system is losing the credo, you know, so to build other things that are possible.
Excellent, thank you. Sarath, you put your hand up?
Yeah. I just wanted to share a small anecdote. I had 2 years ago, I was attending a wedding of my friend's son. So in that wedding, he introduced me to a sitting member of Legislative Assembly. And we were talking, he asked me, what do you do? I said, this is what I do. He said, universal basic income. Oh, that's a very dangerous idea. I mean, no, you should not do that because it is going to make all these fellows drunkards and they will not work, they will not come to work. already this program is doing that, this program, blah, 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 and all that. So I said, okay. I said, sir, how many children do you have? So I said, 3 sons. So what do they do? Oh, when they studied here, they studied there. And so when you gave them money, did you ask them to work for you? Or what conditions you had? No conditions. I just wanted them to study, and they are doing well. One is in the US and the other is in somewhere, and somebody is prospering, blah, 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 and all that. So, sir, have they become drunkards? What do you mean? Drunkards? I said, you said that if you give anything unconditionally, they'll become drunkards. He didn't go to the next step of saying that, no, my children will never become drunkards. Those bastards will become drunkards. So the point, that's the whole thing, you know, but I think we have to keep talking.
Indeed, thank you. Just a couple minutes with you, Stacey. There was a question from Richard about the influence, what difference has Andrew Yang made to the awareness of UBI across the US, and how's that momentum being sustained?
I think that obviously his campaign had a huge impact in the United States. I think he in many ways, kind of laid the groundwork for people to be able to think about alternatives during this pandemic and have basic income be at the top of that. A lot of what's interesting is a lot of the, I think there's kind of 2 ways that he had a big impact. On the grassroots level, because he had a wide kind of range of people who supported him. And so I can talk for a minute about that. I think he also had a big impact on the political side in ways that maybe we didn't realize until the pandemic hit. And I think it may have been on the debate stage and in kind of backroom conversations with other people who were running to be president, who were also running campaigns. At the beginning, I'm sure most of you aren't actually following our like early stage politics in the United States, but for the Democratic primary for the president, we had 25 people running. And so we had a lot of people running, a lot of people that are in our political system, from senators to representatives, governors, you know, kind of all the way up and down the political kind of hierarchy. And during and so he did really well. He obviously got a lot of attention. He was on a lot of debate stages. Like he met many thresholds that successful politicians were not able to meet in order to continue to be on the debate stage. So that, you know, caught a lot of politicians' eyes. Then like, oh, this guy, there's something going on. And of course, his primary policy was.
Sorry, Stacey, can I just ask a question though? Like, how is that sort of carrying on? I mean, is that movement that
so what we saw? So what we saw with the pandemic is immediately legislation was presented for an emergency UBI, and some of the key people who presented that were Kamala Harris, also somebody who ran to be for the president, Cory Booker, who ran to be president, Tim Ryan, who ran to be president. There was all these people who were on that debate stage who actually presented within the first 6 weeks of the pandemic emergency basic income. And so it's just been interesting to see Bernie Sanders, you know, presented with Kamala Harris, $2,000 a month emergency UBI for people during kind of for the duration of the pandemic. And so I think that he had a big impact in that way. It made it not, you know, it made people realize it may not be political suicide to start to talk about that kind of thing, to talk about cash transfers to people, and that the pandemic was if there was ever going to be a time to talk about it, this was the moment. On the grassroots side, I think one of the most important things that we've really been working on at Income Movement, we work closely with Humanity Forward, which is Andrew's organization that kind of was born out of his campaign, as well as Economic Security Project, US Big, lots of organizations here in the United States around basic income. But what we've found from a grassroots side that's been most critical and important is helping everyday people who support basic income and who maybe kind of were brought into the fold of basic income through Andrew's campaign, to help them shift their thinking from the idea of focusing on a single campaign to focusing on a movement. And that's a really big shift. We talk about it as, you know, the difference between training for a sprint versus a marathon, right? In both cases you're running, but like the pace of it, how you think about what are the successes, what are the milestones, how you're really kind of designing your entire roadmap for success is totally different. And it's really, and you know, in a campaign, everything's predefined. You know the targets that you're driving towards. You're driving towards certain election dates, certain numbers, and so people dig deep. I mean, there were a lot of people that moved to Iowa or moved to New Hampshire specifically to like canvass for Andrew. And some of the most diehard supporters of basic income were spending 15 to 40 hours a week just trying to get the word out for his campaign. And that's important at certain times within any movement to have that very concentrated, very focused time and energy. But when we're thinking about a movement, it's a very different, and we can't think of the lack of success at the polls for Andrew's campaign as the way we define whether or not he was successful. The legacy of that campaign is significant for the movement, right? And that's an important piece. And we've been working with Humanity Forward. We've been working with a lot of the organizations that do have a large membership, kind of that grassroots membership and engagement level, to help people start to understand that and also give them the perspective of what are we trying to accomplish in 2020 and how far have we come. And for International Basic Income Week this year, we're doing, we have the Basic Income March, but the evening before we're doing a kind of the year of 2020, the year of basic income kind of highlights. And we really, the goal of that whole live stream program is to help people understand how far we've come as a movement this year and how significant the progress has been. That and when we're thinking about it as a marathon, we've actually made incredible progress this year. If we think about it as a sprint, then we may feel disappointed that we don't have as many people getting elected into, you know, official capacities, or we haven't gotten emergency UBI passed in our legislation. If that's the only thing we're focused on, it's easy to be disheartened. And but when we actually start to look at the more expansive goals of creating a movement and getting that majority in Congress, we see that actually so much of the most important foundation has been established this year. And that it means that in 2022, when we start to do our next election cycle, we're going to go from 30 UBI congressional candidates probably to 100 to 150. And that, like, when we see that kind of significant growth, that's when we actually get people elected. And so I think that that's been the biggest piece. Andrew was an amazing, in some ways he's almost kind of like the spark, but then like how do you be thoughtful about how to harness the energy of that fire in a way that's going to be able to sustain for years. And that's been an exciting challenge, but certainly one that is key and kind of top of mind for us here in the US.
Great, thank you so much, Stacey, and good luck with everything. Just to say that if you go to incomemovement.org, then you can see what they're doing, and also the Basic Income March on the 19th as well. We're trying to figure out what we're going to do here. We've just had more lockdown stuff going on, so anyway, we'll see what happens. So awesome. Thank you so much, Stacey.
We do have, basicincomemarch.com. We have 40 cities across the globe participating on the 19th. And so super excited to see that. And if you go there, you'll be able to find more information about all the things. Thank you so much, you guys. Have a great rest of your conversation.
Thank you, Stacey. Cheers. Okay, well, we had a question from Vibor.
In a universe of advocacy or strategy, how much are those people allies? Where do you position them? How do you work with them? Given that there are very different ideological positions that they are coming from. This could be like a lot of the literature, a lot of advocacy around in support of basic income currently comes from the neoliberal right, which says that current welfare expenditure is extravagant. There's so much that's spent on government machinery. So just give everyone a basic income and get away with it, or do away with all the fat around the bureaucracy.
So basically, what is it? It's like, how do you work with people who you are actually ideologically quite
different in the approach?
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Anyone want to go for that? Sarath or yeah?
I'll go.
Okay.
I think two days ago, somebody posted a poster of a quotation by Desmond Tutu. He said that when you want peace, you don't talk to your friends, you talk to your enemies.
Mm.
So I think at the juncture at which we are, we can't be very picky and choosy about talking to only those who agree with us or partially agree with us. I think we should talk to everybody, particularly people who are likely to misuse this idea and take it somewhere else. So I think we should keep engaging with everyone, not to tell them what is the gold standard, but to engage and have a discussion, because basic income is one excuse through which we start opening conversations on a wide variety of things about inequalities in the society, wide variety of things. So that's a great opportunity. So by choosing to talk to the government committee which was drafting this, and coming from that angle of basically pruning the wastage in the system, we have been able to actually take them a little in some other direction and come out with some new solutions. So I think our role is really to engage with everybody. Vibor, I think nobody is an enemy. I mean, it's not that people who don't agree with us, we should not talk. We should talk precisely to those people. Otherwise, we will be patting each other's backs.
Right. Is anyone, Gabriela or Julio? Gabriela, do you want to speak to that, or?
Maybe I can comment briefly, because I still have to meet someone that is actually like a real life advocate, like a real life right-wing advocate for basic income. Like, we know like they theoretically exist, but I haven't like really met one in real life. Mm-hmm. But recently, in the last couple of weeks, we have had some declarations by far-right politicians here in Chile saying like, oh, basic income is coming, all this idea of automation and how we're going to support of these people losing their jobs because of the robots and all that. And they have done some mention, and I'm pretty sure that we will have some differences on what does it mean to implement it, and in relation to other welfare elements of the state. But I mean, I hope, I would love to be in a table talking about this with them. I mean, I don't see the damage, and we can explore what we agree and disagree. Like, I hope that will come to happen. It's going to be some interesting conversation.
For sure, yeah. Carolyn or Julio, do you have anything to say on this? Or?
Awesome. Okay. Yeah, so I was just going to say something very quickly about the political advocacy and strategy that people are using. And, one thing is, when you have something new, people are going to use them for different purposes, just like Sarath has said. However, again, in the spirit of advocacy and as advocates, we must also assess the continuum of ally building. And the ally building continuum will have people who are totally opposed to you, and in the extreme end are people who are strongly supporting you. In the middle is a mix of people who are neither opposing nor proposing, and people who are proposing for different reasons. And that's the exact reason we are here as advocates, that we should bring the facts to the table for things, arguments that can sustain the advocacy for a basic income, that it is good that someone can think about a basic income, but it is our responsibility to help them understand why thinking about a basic income in the right way is of more honor to the people they want to serve than being more, thinking of their individual self-centered aggrandizement. Yeah, so that's my point, Barb.
Yes, thank you, Carolyn. That was great. Okay, right. So from Maggie, do you notice a different response to basic income from those you introduced the topic to, dependent on the person's age? That's certainly been my experience, but other people might have something to say about that. Like, so depending on a person's age, is the response you get different to this? Julio, since you're there, do you want to go, or you want to think about that for a minute?
Maggie, actually, the older they are, the worse they get.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so too.
And I think that, you know, we just think about this as a cultural fit and destabilizing the status quo. So the holders of the status quo are going to be the older ones, and the younger people are those, you know, more progressive population groups who are ready to take up new challenges, test new things, and basic income would be in that bucket. And you know, like Sarath has said, and Julio, that, you know, when you meet older people and talk to them about just giving people money, they're the typical capitalists who think they have been here working for all this money and it should be kept for themselves. And you know, they're very paternalistic in prescribing how lazy people should be working to get more money, or young people just want to, you know, get easy money and go. And they're very dismissive in their responses.
Thank you. I'm just going to try to get through more of these questions because we don't have a whole lot of time. And it's certainly been my experience that, yeah, younger people get it straight away. Although, you know, it has to be said, we have a lot of pensioners, you know, pensioner activists in the basic income movement who very much appreciate the fact that they have a basic income right now. So just let's honor that, you know, while we're here. Oh yes, there's a question about migration.
And Barb, maybe that's the point that you just brought might be an opportunity for us as advocates of a basic income, that for those older people, we can use the example of pensioners as, you know, a typical example of where a basic income is useful.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, and many pensioners I know say that they're much busier now than they were when they were working. So yeah, and that's the argument. That's what you can use to bat away the will people work argument. That's for sure. Right, there was an important question here from Ariel. To date, most welfare states provide rights as citizen rights, where immigrants are to a certain extent excluded. So do people have thoughts on migration and basic income?
This is a big question, because so I think, like, for those theoretical right-wing people, Gabi, I think this is where it becomes an important issue, because if there is such a thing as a fascist government giving people a basic income, they will give it to the nationals who hold a passport from their nation. So that only reifies this idea of citizenship as like having these papers. So in that regard, there is this danger that you might create sort of second-class citizens, or reify these divisions even more. So, you know, we need to be careful of this. And I think that's why I always say, like, the universal of a basic income ends at the nation state. So in terms of thinking about migration, we have to think about all the ways of conceiving society beyond these borders. So we can think more of a pluriverse, or something that unites all these things together. And to think that, you know, the economy as a planet is connected. So when the Amazon forest is being cut down to plant soya and have a bunch of cows, then that will be imported to Europe and then kill all the small and medium farms that are here. So a basic income for farmers, for example, and for migrant people, both here and in Brazil, is a way to fight these imperialist policies. So we need to really think interconnectedness about all these things, and how the system sort of divides us by exporting capital from one place to the other, expropriating people, taking people from the land. We also need to think creatively in a way where we can fight this in a way that goes beyond the borders of the day.
Great, thank you, Julio. I saw Sarath's hand go up.
In all our articulations, it's extremely important to not use the word all citizens, nor legal residents. I think that was the second option. But I think we should use that universal means all normal residents of a territory when we are talking about a national basic income. So I think that's why, Julio, I think Bob and we made a small presentation 2 weeks ago on connecting to the global citizenship, and also to historically go back to the colonialism and then what it has extracted from the colonies. So I think it's a very important perspective, and migrants' question has to be included into our articulation.
Great.
What the governments will do, they will do. But I think what we should say, we should say.
Great. Thanks.
Completely agree with what my two friends said.
Yeah. No,
I
and it
just wanted to say something.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think migration in its own self is another forest with its own dynamics and considerations and complexities. And I think as basic income advocates, ours would be pitch for what basic income can do and let that sink in. We have seen, in Kenya, very localized type of responses where basic income has enabled people to migrate from rural villages to look for jobs in urban areas. And we should expect that, there could be longer haul or larger volume migrations that would be possible. And how do we as basic income advocates position those as advantages to the people rather than get into the nuances of politicized conversations about migration, acceptability in other countries, assessments of individuals? Like, we should let people see that when you give people a basic income, you're widening their opportunities, and people in wherever they are should be facilitators and catalysts of those opportunities, not people who sink people further down. How you do it, figure it out from where you are.
Brilliant. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we were arguing for a euro dividend, and on the basis that we wanted, for people to be able to stay where they are as well as to move, because we have this whole thing about freedom of movement in Europe, but in fact, it's actually just freedom to work, because you're actually not supposed to move unless you want to work. Okay, so yeah, and and again, just the terrible situation that's happening in rural communities globally. So from Vibor,
my question is basically prompted by something Anna Dynasty recently wrote, and I think it is something that basic income advocates need to consider and get a grip over, is the idea of privacy concerns around information, particularly where that data is going, the morality of the government having that data, and then the morality of different types of governments having that data. Because the one thing that we are relying on is that complete identification and data storage system. And in India, for example, we've seen some horrible mishaps with the government trying to protect people's privacy, including at one point saying it is that all data is stored behind a wall that's 50 feet wide, which is not a way to store digital data. Anyway, sorry, so my point being, as basic income advocates, where do we, what do we think about the privacy and concerns around data management?
I don't know. Julio, do you want to address that, or because you probably know more about that than anyone here?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think this is an interesting conversation in the context of right now, because central banks are talking about creating what they call a central bank digital currency. So basically, it's just a token in the computer of the central bank in Europe, in the US, which will give people a basic income. So you would have it digitally, right? And so what that means in practice is that you have a centralized institution that controls and sees all the information of the transactions that people are doing. We can talk about what that does in Europe, in the sense of it's, if that actually were to happen, if people were to get a basic income through some sort of central bank, it would create something, some very, very centralized institution. But beyond that, it's a lot of data, it's a lot of power concentrated there. And the question is, to what extent, will people have sovereignty over their data? Will there be a data commons, or will there just be, their data be extracted as it is now, right? So, those are important questions to raise. I think on that front, I think there is not a lot of work done on that field. Like at Circles, we try to make it so that people actually have control over their data and nobody can actually steal it from them. But it's a political question, really, of how do we make the politicians accountable to our data? Okay, fine, they give us a basic income, but then they're like nudging here and there to make us do things, right? So that's an interesting discussion.
Well, it's certainly, yeah, the thing that's coming out. Gabriela, because you've done some work on this. Sarath, yeah.
Just a brief comment. I think in the last 7 to 10 years, I think our privacy, our data has been massively compromised. I think as much as I worry about government having my data, my data, I'm more worried about the private companies having my data. So tomorrow when I'm going to get a basic income, Amazon is going to say that this guy was buying perfumes. So he should not be given basic income. This woman is buying books, or this woman is buying something else. So I think we are moving into that kind of a very insecure territory. I think we need to also think of, I don't know, I'm not in that domain, but I think people who are into that have to really think about the security concerns. I think everybody seems to know everything about me.
So your heart is an open book. Carolyn, would you like to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say that, you know, we are in a space where we have people who have illegally accessed people's data. And there are people whose data is sitting somewhere, even without their knowledge. And people are minting money out of that data without their knowledge. I think I would flip it over and say, don't we think that basic income is giving us an opportunity for transparent data mining, where we can also use that platform to educate people, to make them aware about how important the information they're providing is and how they can increase accountability, even with the people who are collecting this data. And I will give you an example. That we commit at Give Directly, we commit to take people's data, but also let them know how important that data is and commit to them never to give that data to anyone. So recently, the government of Kenya asked us for the data of the people we've enrolled in the program, and we said we have a commitment to our recipients. And for us to do that, with all due respect to the government, we would like to get consent from the recipients, but we want you to articulate very clearly what is it that you want to use this data for. And the whole conversation about single registry, which most governments in Africa are using, came up, and we said we need to engage on the single registry and whether those will do more harm to the recipients or not, and whether providing data to you as a government provides recipients with more insecurities, particularly populations that have been on the edge, like young people living in the informal settlements who've been unfairly targeted for criminal activities. How will you as a government ensure that these recipients are protected? And once we are sure about that, we communicate that to the recipients and ask them, do you still allow your data to be shared with the government? And, you know, UBI then gives us a moral platform for us to build or empower recipients to be able to engage with people who receive their data and be aware that their data is sitting somewhere, so that when they find their data somewhere, they will be able to ask, last time you came here, you took my data, where did you take it? Somebody's using that same information. What happened to it? Did you give it to them? You know, empower communities.
Right, brilliant. We're coming up towards the end. Does anyone have something that they'd like to say in closing? We're coming up, you know, I just want to remind people that next week, starting the 14th to the 20th, is International Basic Income Week. If you look up basicincomeweek.com, I believe, or just do Google on it, you'll find activities that are happening all over the place. Yeah, so I just want to thank people. Is there anyone with anything burning on their mind that they'd like to say to the world last?
I'll just close with one. I'll just close with one. Now that we are talking about basic income advocates, I strongly believe that the change is never linear. So what is, I think when Swiss referendum happened, the entire press wrote saying that people of Switzerland have rejected basic income. And then Philip Vampari, he wrote an article from 0 to 22. So suddenly, so from 0, we were at 0, and he's talking of after 25 years of working on it. So I think when that sudden explosion comes, we don't know. So it's not that it'll take a very long time when we have very strong opponents to it. You never know, they'll all turn. They'll all turn one day when the tide is high. So I think with that note, I just want to close and thank you so much.
Okay, well, I want to thank everyone so much for this. And when we put this up on YouTube, we'll, put your contact, like how people can get in touch with your organizations, which would be great. I've learned so much from this, and I've been around for quite a while, and I've spoken to all of you before. So I really want to thank you for a fantastic conversation. And again, to remember the legacy of David Graeber, who's been a great teacher to a couple of us, or 3 of us, and certainly friend to humanity. I'd like to dedicate this to him and to basic income, which he said was the imagination strikes back. And because of the way that it widens conversations, I mean, it really, in my experience, it's really something that actually enables people to talk about the things that concern them in a much wider way than they might otherwise have thought they could, because somehow when you imagine the money in your pocket, a whole world kind of opens up, which means that people, they feel they can talk about banks, or they can talk about money, or they can talk about allocation of resources in a way that they always thought, oh, that's for the experts. So yeah, that's my little note on that. But yeah, so with this, again, thank you so much for taking the time to join us, and hopefully we'll see each other soon in some context. Yeah. So thank you so much for a rich discussion.
Bye, Barb. Thank you
everyone.
so much. Thank you so much for
Bye
organizing
bye.
this.
Thank
Bye.
you,
Bye.
Caroline.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Barb.
Sarath. Thank you, Gabi.
Bye, 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 Caroline,
See you
Julio,
soon, friends.
Gabi, bye.
Bye, Sarath.